Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The sun was setting over Washington International Airport, casting long shadows on the tarmac. In the crowded terminal, travelers hurried to their flights, each absorbed in their own affairs. Amidst this bustle, a striking yet elegant figure stood out, Aaliyah Johnson, a seasoned 35-year-old pilot. Her immaculate uniform, gleaming badge, and natural composure commanded respect. She adjusted her cap and meticulously checked her instruments before climbing into the cockpit. Nearby, Margaret Whitman, a white woman in her 50s from a wealthy and influential family, watched the scene. Her gaze settled on Aaliyah with a mixture of contempt and disbelief. In her mind, a black pilot could not possibly be worthy of authority in a cockpit. Margaret crossed the hall, her designer bag swinging against her hip, and planted herself in front of Aaliyah with a cruel smile. Without warning, she blurted out, "Excuse me. I think you've chosen the wrong job, miss. Perhaps you should be a secretary, not a pilot." The passengers around her turned, surprised and shocked by the brutality and clumsiness of the attack. Aaliyah, despite the public humiliation, remained motionless, her hands resting on her instruments, her expression perfectly controlled. She had faced far worse in her career, but never in such an openly racist and insolent setting. Margaret, encouraged by the silence of the witnesses, continued. "You know, some people shouldn't wear a uniform, it scares the passengers." Aaliyah's face remained impassive, but in her eyes burned a contained anger, a silent determination. She knew this moment would not be forgotten, and that every gesture, every word from Margaret would be etched in her memory and in the memories of the witnesses. She had the means to retaliate, and not just verbally. Just as the plane was about to take off, fate began to weave an unexpected twist. Margaret had just provoked a woman whose dignity and power far surpassed her arrogance and privilege. The plane was ready for takeoff, the engines purring softly. Inside the cockpit, Aaliyah Johnson was giving the instruments a final check. Every gesture was precise, every movement deliberate. But behind the cockpit door, the atmosphere was tense. Margaret Whitman, unable to contain her arrogance, had decided to continue her humiliation. She banged on the cockpit door, demanding to speak to the pilot. "I can't believe you would let a person like you fly an airplane," Margaret exclaimed, her voice echoing through the hall. Aaliyah took a deep breath. She knew that any impulsive reaction could be interpreted as a threat or a sign of professional incompetence. Yet, she had to make it clear that this behavior was unacceptable. "Ms. Whitman, I advise you to leave the cockpit immediately. Your behavior is inappropriate and dangerous," she replied, calmly but with icy firmness. Margaret burst out laughing, a cruel and smug laugh. "Oh, I see, you think your uniform makes you untouchable. You should be grateful I didn't have you sent away in front of everyone." The passengers waiting in the hall had started filming with their phones. Their expressions oscillated between astonishment and indignation. Margaret didn't realize that every word, every gesture, was being recorded. Aaliyah, still calm, took out her phone and quickly dialed a number. "Marcus, yes, it's me. Something just happened at the airport," she whispered. Her husband, Marcus Reynolds, a high-ranking official at the Department of Defense, immediately grasped the gravity of the situation. He would mobilize his contacts and resources to ensure that justice was served. Margaret, unaware of the connection between Aaliyah and Marcus, continued her humiliating performance. But Aaliyah had already seized control of the situation in a way Margaret could never have anticipated. Anger, contempt, and the power of karma were beginning to brew, unseen but imminent. The captivated passengers realized they were witnessing a historic moment, a confrontation between arrogance and dignity, between racism and imminent justice. And no one yet knew that the turn of events would shock the entire country. The following morning, social media and local news outlets were abuzz. Videos of the pilot's humiliation, filmed by outraged passengers, were already circulating. The footage showed Margaret Whitman shouting and sneering, while Aaliyah remained calm, impassive but resolute. In her office, Margaret was furious. She couldn't understand how her arrogance could now be exposed to the entire nation. She thought she could control appearances thanks to her money and connections. But what she didn't know at all was that Aaliyah had mobilized Marcus, her husband, and her influential contacts in the army and the government. Marcus, strategic and methodical, had prepared an impeccable legal action. The videos filmed by the passengers would serve as evidence. Irrefutable. The witnesses, including several airport employees and passengers, would be asked to confirm the humiliation. An experienced legal advisor in business matters discrimination would handle the case, ensuring that Margaret could neither lie nor escape the consequences. Soon, Margaret received an official summons. She was being asked to appear to answer accusations of discriminatory behavior and undermining the dignity of a professional on duty. She paled as she realized her attempts at control and intimidation had failed. Everything she had done was now public and traceable. The media seized upon the story. Newspaper headlines read: Black pilot humiliated by a wealthy passenger, video shocks the nation. On social media, hundreds of thousands of people commented, sharing indignation and support for Aaliyah. Margaret, used to adulation and impunity, suddenly found herself ostracized. But the most humiliating part was yet to come. At the time of the hearing, the legal advisor appointed to represent Aaliyah was none other than Marcus's private counsel, a renowned expert in racial discrimination and military justice cases. Margaret was trapped. Every lie she attempted would be quickly refuted by tangible evidence and irrefutable testimony. That day, for the first time, Margaret Whitman understood that her money, her influence, and her arrogance were nothing compared to the dignity, competence, and network of those she had underestimated. Karma was beginning to strike, and the lesson would be memorable. A few days later, the story of Aaliyah Johnson and Margaret Whitman made headlines in newspapers and on national television. Videos of the humiliation, widely shared on social media, had garnered millions of views. The hashtags #RespectForAaliyah and #HumiliationWhitman were everywhere, and the entire country was discussing the incident. Margaret, who had always believed her money and status would protect her, saw her life crumble. Her name became associated with racism and arrogance, and her business began to suffer. Her business partners distanced themselves, her social media was flooded with criticism, and her loved ones started to shun her. The powerful woman she thought she was found herself alone and publicly humiliated. Meanwhile, Aaliyah received messages of support from thousands of people, from novice pilots to Army veterans, all praising her composure, dignity, and control of the situation. She had transformed a public humiliation into an example of courage and professionalism. At the official hearing, Margaret could only endure. Every gesture, every insult she had uttered was documented and attested to by witnesses. Her lawyer tried to defend her, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judges and the media looked at Margaret with a mixture of consternation and disbelief. When the decision was announced, it was clear and final: an immediate travel ban on all commercial flights, a hefty fine for discriminatory behavior, and the permanent recording of the incident in the public record. Margaret had lost all control of the situation, and her name would forever be associated with this humiliation. Aaliyah, for her part, emerged stronger from this ordeal. Her career was hailed as an example of professionalism and strength in the face of racism. The story shocked the United States, but it also sparked a national debate about respect, equality, and dignity in public spaces. For the first time, Margaret understood that some actions have immediate and irreversible consequences. And the entire country had witnessed this dramatic turnaround. A few weeks after the incident, Margaret Whitman was trying to resume a normal life, but everywhere she went, her name and behavior were already known. Social invitations had stopped, professional contracts had been cancelled, and even her influential friends were distancing themselves. Every attempt at normalcy was thwarted by the memory of her own arrogance. For her part, Aaliyah Johnson continued her successful career, but she didn't just let Margaret suffer the consequences. She gave a public speech to civil aviation authorities, emphasizing the importance of respect, equality, and dignity for all professionals, regardless of their skin color. This speech was broadcast nationwide and went viral. Then came a pivotal moment. Margaret tried to fly again from the airport where it had all begun. But her name was now on the blacklist of undesirable passengers. Security agents, alerted to her behavior, prevented her from boarding. Humiliated in front of all the other travelers, Margaret realized that her reputation was not only ruined in the media, but also in the real world. Aaliyah, informed of the situation by colleagues and passengers, remained silent, but the satisfaction in her eyes was evident. Karma had struck with implacable precision. Margaret had fallen exactly where her hatred and arrogance had led her. The national community celebrated Aaliyah's courage and professionalism. Anti-discrimination organizations and associations officially recognized her, and she became a symbol of dignity, equality, and justice. Margaret Whitman, for her part, learned too late that arrogance and racism have irreversible consequences. She was ruined socially, professionally, and morally, and her name would forever be linked to the humiliation she had inflicted. In the streets, in the media and on social networks, a clear lesson emerged: underestimating someone because of their skin color or status is not only unfair, but often destructive to the one who believes they are above others. And so, Aaliyah Johnson's story became legendary, not just for the humiliation inflicted on Margaret Whitman, but for the strength, dignity, and justice she embodied in the face of hatred.